Hello, gentle viewers. I'm George from Ireland, and this video is about why President Trump is wrong to pull out of the Paris Climate Accords. So I'm going to set out what's happened and my opinion on it. Donald Trump has announced the United States is pulling out of the Paris Agreement. So what is the Paris Agreement? It was made a few years ago, recognizing that climate change is real, and all countries but Syria and one other agreed this is the case, and that they must limit their carbon emissions so we don't have so much global warming. So what is climate change? Well, the planet is getting hotter, and that's mainly caused by human activity. Therefore, it's anthropogenic. This leads to more storms, more droughts, more extreme weather events, occasionally unusually cold weather, but on the whole, it's hotter than it was before. Rising sea levels as the polar ice caps melt and glaciers melt and so forth. So climate change is happening. Every scientist worth the name says that, just about. And yes, you'll very occasionally find a dissident, a bit like you'll find some young Earth geologists who claim the world is only 6,000 years old because that's what it says in the Bible. So one very rarely has absolutely every scientist saying something, and in science it's extremely unusual to prove things 100%. There's just a very high percentage chance that this is true. As one doctor said to me, there is more evidence for climate change than for the medicines that I prescribe. But I think we'd all agree that generally taking medicine when you need it is a good thing. Now, let me see. So I know some of the skeptics will say there were ice ages before, there were warmer eras before. Now, yes, that's true, but it's never happened quite so suddenly and quite so dramatically, at least 2 degrees Celsius hotter in a century. And it's blatantly linked to human activity, to more carbon emissions. So this Paris Agreement commits every country to reducing its carbon emissions, to trying to slow the rate of growth of the temperature or increase of the temperature, and eventually to bring it back down again. So it sets targets for different countries to be assessed every few years. Now, the very wealthiest countries, such as the United States, have greater targets to achieve because they are so rich anyway, they use so much energy per capita, therefore they can afford to make these cuts. Less wealthy countries have more moderate targets to reach, partly because their per capita carbon emissions are lower, and they can't afford to invest in green technology quite so much. So I'll explain why what President Trump did was wrong on many grounds, morally wrong, scientifically wrong, diplomatically wrong, and so on. Trump says he was elected to represent Pittsburgh, not Paris. That's true, but climate change doesn't recognize borders. It's going to impact on the United States like every other country. And some island nations, which are dependencies of the United States, such as the Marshall Islands, are very worried because they're going to be subaquatic at this rate quite soon. Let me see. So it affects people's health. It means there's less fertile land as desert encroaches on land that was hitherto fertile. It's going to be bad for our health. Let me see. So why would all governments in the world, bar two, recognize that climate change is real if it wasn't? It's very, very unusual for all but 2 nations in the world to agree on something. But now it's 3. Now the United States is pulling out of it. Many Americans recognize that climate change is no illusion. Even some Republicans, even a few members of the Trump Camarilla, such as his daughter Ivanka. So quite apart from the very deleterious impact it'll have on the planet, on people's health, we have to look at why it's unwise for the United States diplomatically. It's bad faith. People will say, why should we ever make an agreement with the United States in future? Because then another president will come and just break that agreement. Trump has boasted he'd tear up the Iran deal, boasted about tearing up the Trans-Pacific Partnership. He was going to pull out of NAFTA and all this and all that. So he's charging around like a bull in a china shop. And is a return to unilateralism, much worse than under the Bush administration. That's George Bush Jr., I mean. Let me see. So pollution harms everyone. It is no respecter of borders. And so I know those who work in carbon-producing sectors, or those sectors which use an awful lot of carbon fuels. They might, in the short term, be better off, but the long term, it's going to harm all of us. And we need to switch to renewable energies like hydroelectric energy, wind power, solar power, and so forth. Trump is very much in hock to big oil. He wants to drill everywhere and have pipelines everywhere. I'm not totally against oil. I recognize we need it at the moment. We need to reduce our dependency on it. So Trump took aim at India and China, saying that the goals they have to achieve are less ambitious. And yes, that's true, because they're not as wealthy as the United States, and they can't afford to invest in these clean energies as much as the United States can. The US pollutes more per person than any other country in the world. So it means more public transport, it means smaller houses, better insulated houses, and so forth. Or dressing sensibly in hot climates in the office, not wearing a suit, and then having to have the AC very high. Dress for the climate, you can have the AC a bit lower, things like that. And no, you don't need a massive sports utility vehicle. Smaller cars which use less energy. Now, it's very difficult for politicians to have the courage to tell us we're going to have to live less well, that we're going to have to fly less. And I fly a lot. And the only way to stop someone like me doing is to price me out of it. I suppose we're just going to have higher taxes. And that's the only way people are going to do what's the right thing for the environment. There is hope, like magnetic levitation trains. Those could be a good alternative to planes because they go almost as fast, especially considering they go from city centre to city centre and not from airport to airport. Airports are often far out of the city centre. The time from going 0 miles an hour to top speed with these maglev trains is very short, just a couple of minutes, compared to planes. The minute the door is closed to the minutes at cruising height is about 30 minutes. Anyway, so supposing I'm mistaken and anthropogenic climate change is false, and we'd switch to green energy, well, what would be wrong with that? There would still be less pollution. It would still be energy which is renewable, which can never run out, with less chance of, let's say, explosions in power stations or oil tankers and oils blowing up or oil slicks and things like that, or disasters at nuclear power stations. So green energy is right on just so many levels. It requires the political will and the investment to switch over to it. So Donald Trump has taken a very retrograde step, which I hope comes back on him electorally. But it's very worrying that he is so irrational and just so indifferent to human suffering. And the dispiriting thing is he has substantial support in the United States for this very wrong-headed and harmful policy.